Hi there, thanks for joining us. With me I have Hannah. The message we want to get across today is really focusing on the cost of delaying the start of funding for your retirement. So there are just a couple of industry norms that we tend to use. One of those being that retirees or pension funds look to have what they call a replacement ratio of around about 70%. What that means is that when you retire, you roughly receive as an after-tax income 70% of what you were earning as an employed person. This is fairly appropriate because you must remember that when you're employed, you still have debt, you still have kids, you're actually contributing towards your retirement. So 70% is a very healthy post-retirement benefit. The downside, of course, is that these pension funds work on average life expectancy. So that means you've got a 50% chance of having no money left and still being alive. So what we wanted to do is just kind of give you some ideas around what you ought to be saving in order to meet these very bland retirement funding objectives. So I'm just going to ask you, Hannah, just to run through those objectives in the case study that we've set up.
Perfect. So today we've prepared a case study where the client earns a gross income of 35,000 Rand per month. We've assumed that they retire at age 65 and their life expectancy is until their age 100. In their retirement, we've assumed that they receive an after-tax retirement income of 25,000 Rand per month. And that's in today's terms, and we assume that that keeps pace with inflation throughout retirement. And with regards to the investment strategy, we've assumed that before your retirement, the investment targets a return of inflation plus 4.5%, and after retirement, a return of inflation plus 4% after all fees. So moving on to the next slide where we've got the first retirement scenario. This is if the client starts saving from age 25. So from age 25 to their age 65, we've assumed that they begin contributing the 5,300 Rand per month, which is roughly 15% of their gross income. So we've assumed that they continue to contribute this, and this increases annually in line with inflation until their age 65. At their age 65, they begin drawing their retirement income. So that's the 25,000 Rand after tax per month. So you can see that if they start at 25 and then they continue to save, they'd be able to draw that income until their age 100.
Thanks for that, Hannah. It seems as though you've picked the perfect scenario. I'm going to focus on one that's a little less perfect, and this is a client who delayed starting by 10 years. Doesn't sound like a big deal. Just start their contribution towards retirement at 35. You would think, well, I've still got 30 years to fund for my retirement, so it shouldn't be a problem, and I will just start saving 15% of my income. The reality, though, is if you left it that late and you only save 15% of your income, keeping pace with inflation, by the time you're 65, assuming you need to fund the next 30 years of retirement, i.e. to around about age 90 to 100, you would only be able to afford to draw about 15,500 Rand per month, which is a far cry from the 25 that we spoke about. Postponing the start date even further, you just obviously compound the problem even more. So if one had to, for example, delay starting until age 45, so 20 years later, bearing in mind there's still 20 years of horizon left to save, the downside is that you would only get to a point where you could afford to draw 8,500 Rand per month based on that. So a massive, massive negative impact on delaying the starting point at which you start putting money away for your retirement.
So what we're saying is that in retirement scenario 2, where you begin saving only at your age 35, you would need to work 7 more years past your retirement age or the age 65 to make up the missed contributions. And if you start investing from age 45, you'd need to work an additional 15 years. So therefore, it's delaying your retirement. So what we can see here is we have 3 options available. So we can either delay the retirement date, or we can begin saving more, or we could spend less in retirement. So as you could see when Craig mentioned the second example, the funds that were available to be spent in retirement were much less than the 25,000 Rand.
So Hannah, thanks for that. You've covered, how much longer someone would need to work if they were to be able to retire comfortably. One of the other options, of course, is to look at saving more. And what we find is that to give you motivation to save more, it's quite nice to have some little rules of thumb. So I'm just going to share a couple with you. If you were to start saving from age 25, you've got 40 years for your money to grow before you need to start drawing down on it. So the amount that you would need to save as a proportion of the income you'd want to draw is roughly a fifth. So for every 5,000 you save, you'd be able to draw 25 as a retirement income. Just rough rule of thumb. If you delay that to 35, what happens then is that your ratio comes down to about 1 to 3. So you'd need to save in order to generate 15,000 Rand a month, you would need to save 5,000 Rand a month. And if you delay that to 45, it becomes less than 2. So if you're saving 5,000 Rand a month, it only generates about 8.5 a month. So it's just another way of looking at it and finding the motivation to plan and do the planning as early as possible.